Judge Andrew H. Stones accuses Jasmine Crockett of lying, and from that very moment a political and cultural storm begins to unfold, one that is larger than the personalities involved and reflective of the shifting dynamics of power, truth, and perception in modern America, because when a federal judge known for his stern approach to the law decides to make a public statement that directly calls an elected representative a liar, it challenges not only the norms of judicial restraint but also tests the boundaries of political discourse, and Jasmine Crockett, the fiery Democrat from Texas with a reputation for her unapologetic tone and fierce one-liners, was never going to let such a remark pass quietly. Instead, she chose to deliver a clapback that would not only defend her integrity but also amplify her brand as an outspoken, fearless woman of color in American politics, and her words, sharp, witty, and layered with both facts and attitude, spread like wildfire across social media platforms, turning what could have been a fleeting remark into a viral sensation that occupied news cycles, late-night comedy shows, and countless memes for weeks. And in order to fully understand why this clash between Judge Stones and Representative Crockett resonated so deeply with people, one has to step back and examine who these figures are, what they represent, and how their confrontation highlights deeper structural debates within American democracy, because Andrew H. Stones, often described as a conservative-leaning judge with decades of service, carries the aura of institutional authority, the black robe symbolizing impartiality, discipline, and the finality of legal truth. Yet his critics argue that his off-bench remarks often betray a willingness to engage in political commentary, blurring the line between the judiciary and partisan politics. And on the other hand, Jasmine Crockett represents the new generation of politicians who are unafraid of confrontation, who embrace social media virality as a weapon, who reject the expectation of silence or politeness in the face of attack, and who embody the authenticity-driven style of modern democratic discourse. And so when Judge Stones remarked that Crockett knowingly twists facts and misleads the public, the words immediately carried weight because they came from a judge, a figure society is conditioned to view as an arbiter of truth, but at the same time they raised alarms among legal ethicists who questioned whether a sitting judge should publicly accuse a member of Congress of dishonesty, potentially undermining both judicial impartiality and public trust. And for Crockett, this was not just an attack on her words but an attempt to delegitimize her identity and her role, and her decision to respond with a mixture of evidence, identity, and humor made her comeback resonate beyond political circles, transforming it into a cultural moment, because in her clapback she directly challenged the claim with references to official documents and transcripts. She contextualized the attack within the historical pattern of black women being dismissed as angry or dishonest, and she added witty lines that could be clipped into viral tweets, Instagram Reels, and TikTok soundbites, ensuring that her rebuttal traveled far beyond the courtroom or Capitol Hill. And soon #Crockett Clapback was trending alongside #TruthOverTyranny, with millions of impressions across platforms, showing how a political dispute can morph into a cultural phenomenon in the age of digital media. And while some saw her response as a refreshing example of standing up against institutional intimidation, others criticized it as overly performative, suggesting that her focus was on virality rather than substance. Yet what cannot be denied is that her words struck a chord with a vast section of the public who are increasingly skeptical of authority figures, whether judges, politicians, or media pundits. And what this incident reflects is the collapse of traditional gatekeeping, because in earlier times a judge's remark would be filtered through newsprint editorials or formal rebuttals, but in today's media environment it is instantly contested on Twitter and dissected in podcasts, memes, and TikTok explainers, and thus the Stones-Crockett clash becomes symbolic of broader questions. Who gets to define truth? How do institutional hierarchies survive in an age of decentralized information? And what role do personality and performance play in shaping democratic discourse? And Crockett, through her boldness, managed to seize control of the narrative, turning what could have been a character attack into a moment of empowerment. And this empowerment resonated particularly with young voters, with women, with marginalized groups who saw in her defiance an echo of their own struggles against being labeled, silenced, or misrepresented. While Judge Stone's supporters framed the event as an example of someone finally calling out dishonesty in politics, reflecting the deep polarization in American society where even the notion of truth itself has become partisan, and the media, never missing an opportunity for spectacle, amplified both narratives, with conservative outlets portraying Crockett as evasive and overdramatic, while progressive platforms lionized her as a warrior against systemic bias, and neutral analysts, meanwhile, focused on the ethics of judicial speech, debating whether Judge Stones had crossed a professional line by making a public allegation that sounded more like political commentary than a judicial observation. And so the controversy spiraled into a multifaceted debate about law, politics, race, gender, and the power of social media, and as days passed the story refused to die because it contained all the elements of a modern viral saga: authority figures clashing, witty comebacks, viral hashtags, memes, ideological polarization, and questions about identity and power. And while it began as one judge accusing one congresswoman of lying, it evolved into a referendum on the nature of truth and credibility in 21st century America, a referendum that continues to unfold every time a clip of Crockett's Clapback resurfaces on someone's feed, every time a pundit references it in a debate about judicial overreach, and every time young activists share it as an example of speaking truth to power, showing that the clash between Judge Stones and Jasmine Crockett was never just about one accusation but about the soul of democratic discourse itself. As the controversy continued to swell, analysts began dissecting the deeper implications of Judge Andrew H. Stone's statement and Jasmine Crockett's viral response, and what emerged was not just a story about two public figures clashing but a broader commentary on how institutions and individuals negotiate power in the public eye, because historically judges have operated with an aura of restraint, their authority tied to the perception of neutrality, but Stone's decision to openly call a sitting member of Congress a liar suggested a willingness to wade into political mud, which in turn raised the question: was he motivated by legal principle, personal grievance, or ideological alignment? And this ambiguity became a fertile ground for debate, with legal ethicists pointing out that the American Bar Association's guidelines urge judges to avoid public commentary that might compromise their impartiality, while political commentators emphasize that in an era of partisan division, even the judiciary is increasingly seen through a partisan lens, and so Stone's words were interpreted not just as a factual claim but as a political statement, while Crockett's response, fiery and unapologetic, was also seen as emblematic of the new media-savvy politician who understands that in politics today, survival depends not only on policy positions but also on the ability to win the narrative wars online. And indeed, her viral clapback became less about disproving Stones and more about asserting her own agency, reclaiming the label of liar, and turning it into evidence of bias against her, something she articulated by tying his remark to a long history of women, especially black women, being discredited by powerful men when they speak truth to uncomfortable realities. And this framing resonated powerfully with many Americans who saw in her defiance not just a personal defense but a broader resistance against systemic patterns of silencing. And the virality of her comeback demonstrated how digital audiences reward authenticity and boldness, as the clip of her words was shared not only by political activists but also by comedians, celebrities, and ordinary users who enjoyed the combination of seriousness and sass in her tone. And meanwhile the media frenzy fed on itself, as every news segment or op-ed rehashed the exchange, analyzed body language, dissected tone, and turned a few sentences into hours of content, reinforcing the way modern political controversies achieve longevity through cycles of repetition and reinterpretation. And this cycle also revealed how the public interprets such events through the prism of identity politics, with critics accusing Crockett of playing the race card, while supporters argued she was simply stating the obvious, that race and gender shape the reception of one's words in America. And in unpacking this clash, scholars began to reference earlier moments when women in politics faced similar accusations, from Shirley Chisholm to Maxine Waters, pointing out that labeling them as dishonest or angry was a tactic used to delegitimize their authority. And thus Crockett's clapback was not just witty but historically significant, because it drew a line connecting her struggle to a legacy of resistance. And beyond the personal, the incident also raised crucial questions about institutional respect, because when a judge publicly undermines a legislator, it erodes the delicate balance of mutual deference that helps maintain democratic order. And when the legislator responds with viral sass, it signals the collapse of deference altogether, replacing it with a new kind of gladiatorial combat where the audience decides the winner not by careful analysis but by the number of retweets, likes, and shares. And in this new arena Crockett proved herself exceptionally skilled, as she leaned into the attention, giving interviews where she framed the controversy as evidence of why she was needed in Congress, using the moment to fundraise, to connect with younger voters, and to amplify her agenda on issues like voting rights and criminal justice reform, thereby turning an accusation into a political opportunity. And meanwhile Stones, accustomed to the solemnity of the courtroom, found himself awkwardly cast as a political figure in a media spectacle, something that revealed the limits of traditional authority in the face of digital culture. Because while his words carried institutional gravity, Crockett's words carried cultural resonance, and in the contest between gravitas and virality, it was virality that won, as her phrases lived on in memes and hashtags while his remark was remembered only as the trigger. And this imbalance points to a shift in how society defines truth itself, because in earlier eras the voice of a judge would outweigh the voice of a politician in public trust, But in today's environment, truth is not what is said by authority, it is what resonates emotionally with the audience, and Crockett's truth, framed through sass, wit, and personal conviction, resonated more, suggesting that credibility today is less about institutional position and more about perceived authenticity, and this transition unsettles many who worry about the erosion of respect for institutions, yet excites others who see it as democratization of discourse, and this ambivalence is why the Stones-Crockett clash continues to be discussed as more than a petty spat, but as a microcosm of the struggle between old forms of authority and new forms of legitimacy. And beyond America, international observers picked up the story too, with global media framing it as yet another example of how American democracy is being reshaped by social media, identity politics, and polarization. And for activists abroad, Crockett's clapback became a rallying cry, quoted in rallies and shared as proof that even in powerful institutions, marginalized voices can stand up and seize the narrative, while conservative groups abroad cited Stone's accusation as validation of their own skepticism toward progressive politicians, showing how even domestic controversies spill over into global symbolic battles. And as this global and national debate unfolded, late-night comedians capitalized on the soundbites, sketch shows recreated the confrontation with exaggerated humor, and TikTok creators made parody songs remixing Crockett's clapback, embedding the story deeper into cultural consciousness. And this level of virality underscores how political communication has fundamentally shifted, because the goal is no longer just to win the argument but to dominate the meme cycle. And Crockett's success here highlighted her media savvy, while Stone's misstep illustrated how those accustomed to traditional authority struggle in the new environment. And yet this dynamic is not merely about individual skill but about structural transformation, because when judges, legislators, and journalists all find themselves as performers in the theater of social media, the nature of democracy itself shifts from deliberation to performance, from persuasion to spectacle, and the Stones-Crockett clash thus becomes a case study in 21st century politics, one that scholars, activists, and commentators will continue to dissect as emblematic of the moment when truth, power, race, gender, and virality collided in one viral paragraph of American history. As the dust refused to settle, commentators began drawing historical parallels, pointing out that moments of high tension between the judiciary and elected officials have always existed in American history, but what makes the Stones-Crockett clash unique is the way it has been filtered through the prism of 21st century digital culture, where narratives are not just argued in print or television but fought in memes, hashtags, and TikTok remixes, and this transformation adds layers of complexity to understanding the significance of the event, because when Judge Andrew H. Stones, cloaked in decades of judicial authority, leveled his accusation, he expected his words to carry an unquestioned weight, yet the speed with which Crockett's clapback flipped the narrative illustrates the decline of top-down information control, and in this sense the clash is not just about truth but about who controls the microphone. And Crockett, ever aware of the performative nature of politics, seized the microphone and amplified her voice beyond the traditional gatekeepers, ensuring that her version of events, her humor, her indignation, her sass, became the dominant cultural memory, while Stone's original allegation quickly receded into the background as mere pretext. And this dynamic reveals how in our current political environment authority figures cannot rely on status alone, they must compete in the marketplace of digital attention. And Crockett's victory in this marketplace exemplifies the rise of politicians who blur the line between legislator and influencer, using the same techniques of virality that musicians, comedians, and activists employ. And this blending of roles unsettles traditionalists who worry that politics has become entertainment, but for many others it represents an exciting evolution where authenticity is valued more than polish, and where the public feels closer to their representatives because they see them speaking in their own unapologetic voices, not filtered through stiff press releases. And yet, beneath this celebration, there lies a deeper question. Does virality cheapen the gravity of politics, or does it democratize it, making it more accessible? And the Stones-Crockett saga embodies this tension perfectly, because while Crockett's viral moment galvanized supporters and cemented her image as a fighter, critics asked whether the substance of her rebuttal mattered less than its sass, whether the entire controversy became more about entertainment value than about the real stakes of judicial overreach and political accountability. And scholars analyzing the discourse highlighted that the incident showcased the fragility of truth in an era where narratives matter more than facts. For while Crockett did cite documents and transcripts, it was not the evidence that spread but the one-liners, not the facts but the feelings, and yet feelings are what drive political engagement today. So her strategy was effective, and in this effectiveness lies both the promise and peril of modern democracy, because while it empowers voices that might otherwise be ignored, it also risks reducing complex debates into viral soundbites. And so as the debate evolved, more and more analysts began connecting it to the broader crisis of truth in America, where accusations of lying have become ubiquitous, wielded by politicians, judges, journalists, and citizens alike, often less to establish facts and more to delegitimize opponents, and in this environment the label, liar, functions less as a descriptor of dishonesty and more as a weapon of political combat, and thus Stone's accusation was less about Crockett's actual truthfulness and more about situating her in the category of untrustworthy, a category often reserved for those who challenge existing hierarchies, while Crockett's clapback was less about meticulously disproving him and more about refusing to accept that label, rejecting the frame entirely and replacing it with her own. And this discursive battle demonstrates how identity and power intersect in politics, because Crockett framed the accusation not as an individual attack but as part of a pattern of silencing outspoken women of color, and by doing so she broadened the stakes, making her personal defense a collective one, which in turn generated solidarity across various groups who saw their struggles reflected in hers, and meanwhile Stone's defenders insisted that race and gender were irrelevant, that dishonesty should be called out regardless of identity, but in a polarized environment, even the claim to neutral truth was seen as partisan, further proving that truth itself has become politicized, and as the controversy stretched into weeks, it began influencing conversations on Capitol Hill, with colleagues weighing in, some standing firmly behind Crockett, praising her courage, while others distanced themselves, wary of antagonizing the judiciary, showing how a single viral moment can ripple into legislative dynamics, and beyond the halls of power. The public fascination continued because the story had all the elements of drama: a stern judge, a bold congresswoman, an accusation, a clapback, an audience cheering, and endless replay value, and cultural theorists pointed out that in many ways the clash functioned like a morality play, where society projected its anxieties and aspirations onto the two characters, reading into their words more than what was literally said, and in doing so turning them into symbols larger than themselves, Stone symbolizing old authority, Crockett symbolizing new defiance, and the stage of social media amplifying their clash into myth. And like all myths, it was retold in multiple versions, some framing Crockett as a heroine, some casting her as a villain, but in either case granting her cultural significance that extended beyond legislative work. And this myth-making process illustrates the extent to which modern politics is not just about governance but about storytelling, with each side trying to shape the story that will stick in public memory, and in this case Crockett's side won the storytelling battle, because when people remember the clash, they remember her clapback, not Stone's accusation, they remember the sass, the hashtags, the memes, the empowerment, not the dry legal claim, and this victory of story over substance is both inspiring and troubling. Inspiring because it shows marginalized voices can flip the script, troubling because it suggests substance might always lose to spectacle, and yet perhaps spectacle has always been part of politics, only now digitized, accelerated, and globalized. And so the Stones-Crockett clash becomes not just a news story but a textbook example for future students of media, politics, and culture, illustrating how power is contested in the 21st century, how authority is no longer enough, how authenticity can dethrone gravitas, and how a clapback can echo louder than a gavel. And this echo continues, shaping not only perceptions of Crockett and Stones but also perceptions of politics itself, as more politicians realize that survival in the public eye requires not just policy acumen but the ability to craft viral moments that galvanize support and shield against attacks. And whether one views this as decline or progress, there is no denying that the Stones-Crockett clash will remain a reference point in debates about truth, power, and performance for years to come. As the saga moved into its final stages of media coverage and political discourse, what became clear was that the Stones-Crockett confrontation had taken on a life of its own, transcending the immediate accusation of lying to become a touchstone for discussions about American democracy, the role of truth, the meaning of authority, and the rise of digital virality as a determinant of political power. And in this expanded frame the clash revealed multiple dimensions, each carrying lessons for different audiences, because for legal scholars the episode was a case study in the ethical responsibilities of judges, a reminder that every word spoken from a person in a robe carries weight and consequence, and that stepping outside the bounds of judicial decorum risks politicizing the judiciary itself, while for political scientists it was a demonstration of how politicians like Jasmine Crockett are reshaping the norms of engagement, not only speaking in legislative chambers but cultivating personas that thrive on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, transforming the practice of politics from dry committee hearings into viral storytelling. And for cultural critics it was a symbol of resistance, a black woman refusing to be labeled and silenced, reclaiming space with wit and authenticity, embodying the ethos of intersectional empowerment. And for everyday citizens it was entertainment, a moment to laugh, to meme, to cheer, to boo, to participate in politics through the language of hashtags and GIFs, which in itself is a significant shift because it suggests that people engage with democracy not only through voting and policy but through sharing, liking, and commenting, integrating civic life into digital leisure. And while some lament this as trivialization, others see it as democratization, because the Stones-Crockett story reached millions who might never read a judicial opinion or watch C-SPAN, yet through a viral clip they encountered questions about power and truth, and this accessibility is both a gift and a risk, for it ensures broader engagement but often at the cost of nuance, and yet nuance has always been a scarce resource in mass politics, so perhaps what we are witnessing is not decline but transformation, and looking closely at Crockett's strategy we see that she understood this transformation intuitively, for she did not waste time issuing a long press release, she crafted her response to be clip-friendly, to have quotable lines, to embody attitude as much as argument, and in doing so she turned the tables on Stones, because while he tried to frame her as dishonest, she reframed him as outdated, biased, and uncomfortable with voices like hers, and in a world where narrative dominance matters more than institutional gravitas, her frame won, and Stones, despite his authority, faded into the background of the story he himself initiated, becoming almost a side character in the larger Crockett narrative, a cautionary tale of how even those with robes and gavels can be overshadowed by a viral clapback, and this inversion is striking, because it suggests that in today's media ecology, narrative power can trump institutional power, and this realization has implications beyond this one case, because it means judges, politicians, journalists, and activists must all grapple with the fact that authority is not granted but earned in real time, through performance, resonance, and shareability, and for future generations of leaders, Crockett's example will serve as a blueprint of how to respond when attacked. Not with silence, not with excessive politeness, but with boldness that doubles as content, because content is currency, and she spent it wisely, cashing in with attention, support, and visibility, while Stone's investment in gravitas depreciated in the meme economy, and as weeks passed and the headlines faded, the legacy of the clash endured in more subtle ways, shaping perceptions of both figures, with Crockett emerging stronger, her name more widely recognized, her base more energized, her opponents more wary, while Stones emerged diminished, his reputation questioned, his impartiality debated, his image reframed as overreaching, and beyond these individuals the episode contributed to the ongoing erosion of the boundary between law and politics, highlighting that no institution is immune to the forces of polarization and virality, and in classrooms, podcasts, think tanks, and activist circles the story is retold with different emphases, some using it as evidence of why the judiciary must remain silent, others as proof of why politicians must resist intimidation, others as a rallying cry for women and marginalized groups to speak boldly, and still others as an amusing anecdote about how sass can outshine solemnity, and in each retelling the core dynamic remains the same: accusation versus clapback, authority versus authenticity, robe versus microphone, gravitas versus virality, and the lesson that emerges is not simple, for it is not merely that Crockett was right or Stones was wrong, but that the battlefield itself has shifted, that in 21st century America truth is negotiated in real time through clashes that combine law, politics, culture, and performance, and that in such clashes the winner is the one who controls the story, not necessarily the facts, and while this may worry those who fear the loss of objective standards, it also energizes those who have long been excluded from controlling narratives, giving them a chance to fight on new terms, and so as the saga of Stones and Crockett is archived in news articles, replayed in podcasts, analyzed in classrooms, and memorialized in memes, it becomes part of a living archive of democracy in the digital age, a reminder that politics is not just what happens in chambers and courts but what happens in feeds and timelines, that a clapback can resonate more than a gavel strike, that authenticity can travel faster than authority, and that the future of democratic discourse will be shaped not only by laws and rulings but by the capacity of individuals to speak boldly, to seize the narrative, and to make their truth go viral, and thus the Stones-Crockett clash, beginning with an accusation of lying and ending with a viral rebuttal, encapsulates the drama of our time, a struggle over truth, power, and voice in a society where everyone is both participant and spectator, critic and cheerleader, judge and judged, and in that struggle Jasmine Crockett emerged as not just a survivor but a symbol, proving that in the noisy, polarized, digitized world of American democracy, sometimes all it takes to win is the perfect clapback.